It's Game 5 of the 2004 NBA Finals. The Black Eyed Peas are playing the ABC theme song, and it's about to be the last game ever of the Shaq and Kobe era in LA. The Lakers are already down 3-1 to the Pistons. They're desperate for a road win. Yet, even though it's an elimination game, an unexpected player comes out of the gates taking most of the shots for LA. Not Kobe, not Shaq, not Gary Payton. It was Slava Medvedenko who led the Lakers in field goal attempts in the first quarter.
Slava Medvedenko.
The 6'10" power forward took catch-and-shoot mid-range jumper after catch-and-shoot mid-range jumper. And it's weird to see given how much basketball has changed since then. Of course, it's not like the mid-range jumper isn't still being used in today's NBA. Players like Kevin Durant and Chris Paul are dominant from there. But those guys are superstars. It's the role players like Slava Medvedenko that now mostly stick to more efficient threes and shots at the rim. Overall, there just wasn't really a sense of urgency to get behind the three-point line. It's weird seeing a guy like Tayshaun Prince willingly spot up in the corner with his feet on the line instead of just taking a step back and giving his team a chance at getting an extra point. Even Kobe had that tendency. On Payton's drive into the lane, Prince loses sight of Kobe, who then smartly relocates into the corner. But you can see the indifference to getting behind the line. Not only would this shot directly become more efficient by taking a step behind the line, 3 is greater than 2, but taking that step back would also make it a longer distance for Prince to recover, giving the Lakers better spacing. So obviously we all know that shot selection and spacing has changed the game. That's been well publicized. But there's been an equally as big change on the defensive side of the ball that doesn't get talked about nearly as much. This is now the 2018 Western Conference Finals. 14 years later, the spacing looks a lot different, but I want you to focus on the defense. The Warriors are cleared out to let Steph attack the mismatch. On the kick out, Steph is going to relocate into the corner. It's somewhat similar to what we saw from Kobe, but the Rockets defend it by switching the screen. So Steph gives the ball up again, and the Rockets switch again. Ultimately, it all leads to a tough shot for Draymond Green. Both the Rockets and the Warriors became known for switching everything on defense, setting a trend that has spread like wildfire in the basketball world. Switching has also become very popular in college basketball. Villanova's 2018 national championship team often switched 1 through 5, relying on even their smaller guards to front and fight in the post after the switch. A year later, Texas Tech made it all the way to the national championship game with their no-middle defensive scheme, another system that also relies on switching essentially every screen. And then just last year, that trend continued. Baylor won it all using a version of that same Texas Tech scheme. Same thing this season. Texas Tech and Baylor are both back in the top 10 in defensive efficiency. Plus, LSU leads the country in that statistic. And you guessed it, they also switch everything. The Tigers this year have one of the most extreme switching schemes I've ever seen. We'll get to all that later in the video, but first, let's go back to that NBA Finals game from 2004. The main ball screen coverage for the Lakers and Pistons during the 2004 Finals was going under. Defenders would slide right under the screen, daring the ball handler to take a jump shot. In this Game 5 of those finals, LA and Detroit combined to make just 6 total threes. Compare that to Game 5 of the 2021 Finals. Milwaukee and Phoenix combined for 27 threes. With present-day guards like Steph Curry and Damian Lillard so good and so willing to shoot behind the screen, the under coverage is now much harder to get away with without giving up threes. Another coverage that was very common back in 2004 was the hard hedge, a tactic where the defender guarding the screener hedges out on the ball, forcing the handler back towards half court. That's kind of like the opposite of going under. The under dares the handler to shoot, the hedge forces the handler to pass. But the similarity is that both of them can lead to threes. When a defender chooses to hedge, the other 3 players not directly involved in the screen have to give extra help, usually sinking towards the paint. Helping or rotating is what leads to catch and shoot threes. So just like it's harder to get away with going under in the modern game, it's also harder to get away with hedging. That's where the switch comes in. By choosing to just switch the ball screen, the other 3 players can stay near their personal assignments. So the simplest reason for why teams switch is to take away three-pointers. Or to be even more precise, to take away the help in rotations that then in turn lead to three-pointers. After the switch, what tends to be left for the offense is just isolation. These clips of the Villanova switches are all examples of the Wildcats taking away ball screens, leading to Michigan resorting to one-on-one isolation plays instead. The numbers also provide some proof for this switching philosophy. This is a list of the 10 defenses that forced the most isolation plays per game this season. It's dominated by switching defenses. Florida State, Texas Tech, LSU, and Texas are four of the high major teams best known for switching. It's not a coincidence they're all in the top 10. To this point, we focused on teams switching on-ball screens, but it also happens on off-ball screens. Phil Jackson and the Lakers loved using post splits in their offense. They'd throw the ball into Shaq and then have the passer set a screen around the elbow area. The Pistons defended the action by just clogging the paint. Both defenders would go under the off-ball screen, not even really worried about the three-pointer. Now when offenses run the same action in 2022, they're looking for the three ball. And as a result, defenses have responded. Here, instead of sagging into the paint like the Pistons, the Grizzlies do the exact opposite. Both defenders jump out on the shooter. Or you even have crazy defense like this, overplaying Steph so much for the three-pointer, he just cuts right to the basket. And so just like we saw with ball screens, switching is now also used to take away the post splits. The big will jump out on Steph at the three-point line. Yet another example of the switch preventing a three. But now take a look at the top 10 defenses at limiting opponent three-point attempts. Those switching defenses that were all in the top 10 at forcing isolations are nowhere to be found on this new list. In fact, if we scroll all the way to the end, LSU and Texas Tech are actually in the bottom 10 at limiting threes. That doesn't really make any sense. I already said that switching is supposed to take away threes. So what's going on here? The answer to that is what's called the triple switch. The Pistons offense back in 2004 was built around floppy action for Rip Hamilton. They'd set up in a diamond and then give Rip the freedom to run off of screens on the baseline looking for a jump shot. Gary Payton guarded it by being physical. He chased Rip all around the court and even tried to jump the passing lane when possible. Here the Pistons countered that aggressive defense by passing to the elbow and then cutting Rip backdoor. Kentucky actually runs that same floppy action this season. Here's that diamond formation, but watch how LSU defends it. Instead of chasing, the Tigers just switch the screen. And those switches help take away Kentucky's screens altogether. The Wildcats chose to throw the ball into the post instead. LSU executes their switches by pointing. Here, Kellen Grady is exchanging towards the corner, so instead of chasing, the LSU players just point at each other. Darius Days will stay high, Brandon Murray will stay low. The point switch is not how switching has traditionally been taught by coaches. The standard used to be that defenders should come together on the switch, literally touching each other instead of just pointing. The reason for that is the point switch is susceptible to the slip. If Grady chose to slip to the basket here, LSU could potentially be in trouble. But the problem with coming together is that it temporarily takes the defenders out of help position. Kentucky is about to drive the ball baseline. If Days was all the way over here, he would have been too late to help on the drive. Here's a point switch from Kansas. Again, instead of coming together, Christian Brown is able to stay in help position on the post-up. When the ball goes in the post, he's ready to pounce. You'll see these point switches all the time from LSU. In the past, some coaches might have even considered them lazy, but with offenses now using 4-out and 5-out alignments, it's crucial to be able to maintain help positioning while still executing the switch. Another potential problem with switching is if the offense attacks the mismatch. Here, Timmy sets the screen, gets the mismatch on Jared Butler, and then just gets right to the rim. LSU has a solution to that problem called the triple switch. Eric Gaines has a potential mismatch situation here. Instead of staying with the roller, he points to Alex Fudge for the triple switch. So it's Fudge who takes the roller, and the smaller Gaines stays out on the perimeter. LSU triple switches on ball screens at nearly every chance they get, and it's how they're able to keep their guards away from having to defend the post. They're certainly not the only team to do it. Triple switching is actually more common in the NBA, where offenses like to attack mismatches, but LSU has led the way with the tactic this season at the college level. Watch Walker Kessler set the screen here. LSU executes the triple switch with Justice Williams ending up on Kessler. Williams then waves for another switch with Days now taking Kessler. It's technically a quadruple switch. 4 different players guard Kessler in an 8-second span. That's basketball for you in 2022. The downside of the triple switch is what happens if both players aren't on the same page. Pinson is pointing for it here, but the indecision leads to an open 3. It's one of the main reasons why LSU gives up so many 3-point attempts. We saw earlier how an individual switch helps take away 3s. But if you take it to an extreme and start switching 4 times in 8 seconds, you're essentially now playing a zone defense. And zone defenses tend to give up a high volume of 3s. In fact, let's go back to the list of teams that give up the most 3-point attempts. Notice that Syracuse is right there by LSU. And of course, the Orange play more zone than anyone in the country. The more extreme a man-to-man defense gets with their switches, the more it starts to resemble a zone defense. Let's look at one last LSU triple switch. Kentucky setting a ball screen while Davion Mintz replaces up to the top. If we were watching this clip with no previous knowledge of the LSU defense, we'd probably think that they're playing a 2-3 zone on this play. On the roll replace, all 5 defenders just hold their spots. Of course, we know it's really a switching man-to-man defense, but it certainly has a lot of similarities to zone. The very first thing that comes to mind for beating a switching defense is to exploit the mismatch. For example, if a big man switches out on the perimeter to a quick guard, it's potentially going to be hard for that big to stay in front when guarding in isolation. Now, the counterpoint to that idea is that iso ball is one of the most inefficient play types, particularly at the college level where there's no LeBron James or Kevin Durant to worry about. NCAA teams are scoring just 0.79 points per ISO this season. To give you context, the average NCAA half-court play is worth 0.87 points. Isolations are well below the average. Of course, that 0.79 number can increase if there's a big mismatch, but the big question is how much? Is it worth abandoning your regular passing and movement just to exploit mismatches in iso ball? A trick that offenses use against switches is called the boomerang pass. When a guard recognizes a slower defender is on him, he'll pass the ball to his teammate, only to have that teammate boomerang it right back. Now that guard hasn't used his dribble. He can play with a jab step out of the triple threat and get the defender off balance. Here, De'Aaron Fox gets a boomerang pass, and watch how he catches the ball on the move, using his momentum to blow by Capella. The opposite way to attack a mismatch is by posting up a big against a small. We already saw an example of that earlier in the video with Drew Timme. Here it's John Teske posting up Carson Edwards after the switch. The defense's response to these mismatches is often to front the post, fighting to prevent the big from ever catching the ball in the first place. Watch this play from last year's finals. PJ Tucker gets switched onto DeAndre Ayton. The smaller Tucker fronts the post, with Chris Middleton giving weak side help. Cam Johnson then flashes up to the foul line, taking away that weak side help and creating an easy layup for Ayton. That high-low flash concept is hard to defend for switching teams that like to front the post. Here it is with LeBron. After the roll to the basket, his defender fronts him. So now it's Melo who flashes up to the foul line area. Another trick to attack switches for the offense is to create indecision with the screen. This is called a ghost screen. It looks like Alabama is setting a ball screen, but they pop out to the perimeter. And that leaves Missouri with a decision. Do they switch or do they stay? Just that little hesitation by the defense can make all the difference. Watch how Auburn attacks LSU here. They set a ball screen to get a switch, then Walker Kessler comes up to set a flare screen but slips right to the basket for the N1. The Warriors did something similar on their very first play of the series against the Rockets. Clay and Steph cleared out to the corner, Draymond acted like he was setting a screen for KD, and then just slipped to the basket with the Rockets trying to decide if they should switch or not. So like any defensive coverage, switching has its positives and negatives. It's by no means a silver bullet, but better spacing and shooting has made it harder to get away with some of the more traditional coverages like hedging or going under. Switching was once thought of as lazy or even a sign of weakness, but teams like Texas Tech and Baylor have kind of obliterated that narrative. They aggressively use switches to disrupt flow and put the offense into uncomfortable situations. And it becomes an even more viable strategy when you have versatile defenders that are capable of guarding multiple positions. The tactic has not only changed how defenses played, it's also forced offenses to evolve. And with all of the recent success teams have had using the switch, you can pretty safely expect to continue seeing the tactic at all levels of basketball moving forward. Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I'm Jordan Sperber, the voice behind the videos you may have been watching for a while. Since the channel's been doing so well lately, I wanted to actually show my face for once and thank you all so much for watching. I gotta say, it's much easier to make these without a camera. I'm still trying to figure out where to look. But again, I really appreciate all of the recent support. The last 4 videos have gotten over 2.5 million views. Personally, I really didn't think that was possible when I first started making super nerdy basketball videos on YouTube. If you haven't already, it does help a ton if you hit those like and subscribe buttons. And I'll see you in the next video.
I never thought in my wildest dreams that I'd be on national television for SportsCenter using the name Zsa Zsa.